Design is the solution to the criteria. And I think that's very important for students is to really listen, to really get to know who their audience is, get to know who their client is, and then find the best solution for them in a well-designed package. I mean, that's really what it is. We're here to guide them through the design process. And then to realize also, we walk away from the projects and they live with the projects. So it's important that they're happy with it.
Welcome to Workspace Design Lab, the show where architects, interior designers, and workplace leaders explore the future of workspace interiors. Each week, we dive into ergonomic office design, modern workspace trends, and sustainable furniture solutions that improve well-being and performance. I'm Sylvanna VanderPark, and together we'll uncover the stories, strategies, and innovations that help you design offices that truly work. Let's dive in. Well, thank you for joining us. We've got Marilyn Simeone. We've got a lifetime career here. So we've got 22 years with Merrill Lynch, the pre-2009 Merrill Lynch. Then you went to an architectural firm for about a year or so.
Correct.
And then to Citibank for about almost 5 years, if I read that correctly. And then on to Princeton University. And currently, you're retired, but
yes,
you never know. But you're still young, and you never know.
Thank you. And prior to Merrill Lynch, I worked for architectural design firms for about 10, 15 years.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So you've even got even more experience than that. So we got to know each other through Merrill Lynch, through your Merrill Lynch years, and we were selected to supply trading desks at the time. So you were looking after the vendor contract, and so that was a huge, at least for me personally as well, for the company and for me personally, a huge event. You know that really formed me a lot. So always very appreciative of those years, and what you did. I'm just running down things here, workplace strategy, environmental sustainability, and project management. You've built and led virtual team worldwide. We were just talking offline that you've had, I'm sure, huge teams and then smaller teams, but always with hundreds of projects going on, around the world or just, within the campus. Creating and managing branch office design and engineering department on a national scale, specializing in corporate facilities and real estate, design and engineering workplace solutions, environmental sustainability program development and implementation, the vendor sourcing and contract management, and then event planning and interior design, which the event planning I saw was connected to art. So you were involved with art acquisition or curating. Wow. And I probably didn't capture everything there, but how did you come into this career? You started off with A&D firms. What did you study at school?
Okay, I got a Bachelor of Science in interior design. And I say Bachelor of Science for a specific reason is because I was stronger more in the mathematics than I was in languages. And I found a school that had these type of programs. So it was really good. And it also, at that time, co-op programs were not available in a lot of the upper education and institutions. And so the school I went to did have a co-op program, which was a great learning experience.
Oh, that's wonderful. Which do they still have it, the program?
They do. Matter of fact, all throughout my career, every time I changed jobs, I always got students from that school to be interns for us. And
wonderful.
Continuing, yeah. So we always had interns it was Drexel University in Philadelphia. And we had interns from other schools as well, but they have a very strong co-op program.
That's wonderful. When I was speaking with a fellow from Genzer, and he was saying that part of the problem when you're like in industrial design or something like that is you're developing concepts within a within a bubble, so to speak, or a vacuum. And it really, what you need is that interaction with the client to kind of give you the parameters, So I guess, like that's what the co-op program offers, it's real world experience. And the real world experience gives you those interactions and, data facts and yeah.
It does, because I was going to go on to get an architectural degree, but one of my co-op periods was working for an architectural firm. Why I enjoyed it immensely, I learned a lot. I realized it wasn't for me. Unless you're the very, very senior designer, you only see parcels or parts of, the different things. And I happen to enjoy more of the personal relationships that you have with your clients when you're in interior design. It's more how people move into the buildings day to day. However, I always work very, very closely with architectural firms, and we put the two together. So we had a wonderful building and a great place for people to work.
To start somewhere, when you're looking at workplace design, we mentioned before on another conversation that you were an owner's rep, but you've worked, within the firm, like when you're working for a corporation.
Mm-hmm.
Were you always an owner's rep, or how did that all get positioned? Like how did you approach workplace design?
Well, it was very interesting. It was one of my major clients when I was working for a design firm. We were doing a 1.5 million square foot campus, and they had asked me to join them. And after 3 times for different positions, I finally did join them. And so it was interesting because I managed the projects in the design firms. And I realized that my strength was more in management than it was in design. And and then having been on that side of the fence, it gave you a lot of experience how workplaces develop, what are some of the constraints, what are some of the things that you have flexibility with. So when I joined the corporation, I went over on the corporate side. And at that time, I was starting a whole new department. Matter of fact, majority of my career was starting a department. And we were looking for how do we roll out branch offices, nationwide, and provide that brand, but in consistency, but at the same time tailoring it to the local needs. And I think by having the experience in design firms and seeing it from a client request and some of the things that we had to do, it gave me a lot more insight on how to marry the two together, because there is entirely different approaches. Because when you're working as an owner, you have a lot of other constraints. You have, well, I wouldn't say constraints, but you have other parameters that you have to work within. And they are really, what is the mission of the corporation? What are some of their business strategies? Who are the people? What are some of the things that work and don't work? And that's really the key. And then you marry good design with it. And I think that's really what gave me a lot of insight, is having that foundation in the architectural design firms prior to going over into being internal with an institution or a corporation.
Was it difficult to make that transition, like just from a mindset? Because now there's a lot more responsibility, I imagine, that people are kind of looking to you. You're the design person, so make it all happen.
That's a very, very good question. It wasn't a hard decision because I was ready to make a change. And I liked the challenge of it. I would have to say you go from a design firm that's, let's see, at that time there were about 50 people. And then all of a sudden you jump into a corporation that's about 85,000 people. It's just looking at things at a larger scale, but really, again, understanding the culture, understanding the differences within the organizations, and realizing that you have, well, I always called it the 80-20 rule. What you design for a workplace would probably meet 80% of the needs of the people who work there. But then there's so many specializations in every corporation or institution, that you need to be able to be flexible and realize that you have to develop other things for other people. But at the same time, providing equity across the firm and longevity of assets. I think that's really the big key thing is the investment. It's a big investment doing the interiors for a major firm, because when they reorganize and everything, and they do, let me tell you, reorganization is constant. They can't wait another year for changes and everything. So really, it's just making it so you're looking at it down the road. Okay, what I'm doing today, how can it work in the future? What are some of the key elements to make it flexible and rapidly changeable for people? And of course, you have technology that evolved over the years. You had the pandemic, which now has created the hybrid situation. So there's a lot of different things, but there's still that core element that you have to make sure you meet, and those are the people's needs, the corporation's desires, and brand. Brand is very important, and a consistency, as well as being fiscally responsible, as well as being meeting the business strategy, what they need to do as well.
Hey, have you noticed how complicated workspace planning can get? Between priorities, costs, and endless decisions, it's easy to lose track of what really matters. At Novalink, we cut through that complexity with a product and a process designed to simplify the journey. Our experienced team walks with you every step of the way, bringing knowledge, guidance, and a practical plan you can trust. If that kind of support sounds right for you, just click the QR code or see the link in the show notes. All right, back to the conversation.
So when you talk about brand, you mean like taking the corporation's brand and making that consistent and, I guess, communicated throughout all the facilities? Is that what you mean by that?
Well, it's interesting because for one of the corporations, I had a global position, and that was what we were trying to do, because the company had grown by acquisitions. And so you had all of these leftover cultures from where people came, and the new CEO that came on board, he said he wanted it to be one culture. And so we worked with the branding people, the C-suite, and we developed, okay, what does it mean to be branded? Because people were going from one site to another site to another, and they didn't want them so different. They want to be able to, so they go in, they feel comfortable. However, one of the things that we also recognized, there were we wanted it so the people who lived in, say, whether it was India or whether it was in Budapest or whatever, that they felt comfortable in that environment because it was reflective of their culture. And that's where we took places like employee lounges, or we took the dining halls, or we took, other spaces, and we personalized it for that location. And so it was reflective of the culture of that location. But the main workplace was very consistent, right down to the technology. So when you went into a conference room, whether you were in London or Paris or the United States, you had the same technology. You had consistency. So you began to feel like one firm. And at the same time, we developed a color palette that came in, different ranges, and we recognized some parts of the world like very subtle color, while others like intensity. So what we did is we took the colors that were part of the brand of the firm, and we took not the primary logo, because we kept the logo as being the logo only, but the ones that they used in print and advertising. And we had it in different values. So you could have it in the different values depending on where you're located. So again, it's giving people choice and recognizing that not one shoe fits all people.
Yeah, but being able to have, like you said, the core elements, like, so that somebody off in maybe a more remote city, not a main city, still feels like, hey, we're still mainstream. We may be in a smaller location, but we're still, kind of the big time with the rest of the company. We're not forgotten and stuff like that. And at the same time, also valued, because one of my questions was like, how do you move a multinational company towards standardization amidst various cultures around the world. And that's exactly, what you just spoke to. So it's very interesting.
It took a long time. I worked with the other real estate groups in the different locations around the globe, and we and one of the biggest things is when you worked in, Asia uses much smaller standards than the United States. And, and the people over in the Asian countries, they had the responsibility of accommodating so many people in a space and adhering to a certain standard that is very dominant in their locations. Whereas the United States, we always are much bigger than most countries. And so, but what we had to do, which is also something that you have to be very careful of, because I've ran into this in several of my positions, we had to downsize work area spaces. And that's where you develop advisory committees and you have major discussions on this. You talk about where the things, how can you do this and bring people along, because change management is a big thing. But working with the different groups around the globe, we had developed design, I call them guidelines and standards, and we developed them for the specific regions, but we also linked them with certain elements. So it was very recognizable that you were in a city location, but at the same time, you were tailoring it towards the people who were working there.
Amazing. That's a lot of consideration.
It is a lot of consideration. And there's also, you have to bring people along. I can't stress that. And also the other thing that's very, very critical, while you have the grassroots, which are your advisory committees and everything, you also have to have the endorsement from top management. Because if you don't have it, it's when you start to roll it out, it makes it very, very difficult to roll it out because people always was elevate it. And if top management isn't on board, it can make it very difficult for you to roll out a program.
Yeah, so you need buy-in from kind of both places, and you're kind of managing them both and finding solutions.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. It's a design problem. You know what I mean? It's like coming in, you have the criteria, this is what you need to do, and you have to find a solution. So that's the one thing that I really enjoyed about it was very similar to doing a design project, is you were trying to create an environment, and these are the elements that you had to pull together and give a solution. And then you also, what's very key too, is having the right design firm working with you and people who have that kind of experience and are able to communicate well with your internal people.
It's exciting, right? When you can kind of start to, you look at a new location or something like that. What kind of personality is this place gonna bring? It's every location is so unique, I'm sure. You talk about kind of setting something up that is like adaptable to the future. What are those elements that are flexible that you kind of build in?
Well, one of the main key things to do is, if you're building a new building, is establishing a good tested module, meaning how does this module work? And I'm talking about for the general work area. I'm not talking about, the public areas and those type of things. But what is that module that will allow you the flexibility to change quickly from an office space into an open plan space versus a conference space? And how do you get those modules to work and be easily rearranged and not cost a lot and take a lot of time to be changed out? And so that's really the flexibility of doing those type of things. And then at the same time is going into because when I was working at the university, we went through each of their buildings, and we had Gothic buildings to brand new modern buildings, and we went into each of the buildings and we identified the different office sizes, especially in the Gothic buildings, and the constraints and everything, and we developed a kit of parts of furniture that would work in the Gothic buildings as well as the modern buildings. And that furniture was also flexible, because we would have the folks who were a lot of the people in the sciences, they say, all I need is sit, stand, desk, and a good computer. Thank you. And then you get into other things like the folks that are in the humanities, they love their journals, they love their books, and everything. And so we have rows and rows and rows of shelving. But, that may be the humanity department this year, but next year it's going to be maybe the art department, so it's like those. So we built the furniture even to marry into the modules. And so they were all modular. And so we could pluck it out and put it in as soon as, and it worked within the space. And it gave them the option of, do they like it to have a lounge area? And then, especially the ones who are faculty, they love to have areas so they could have student meetings and they could have, whether it's parents' conferences or what. And then you also have it so if you have somebody who's very book intense, research intense, they could have their rows and rows of journals and books. So, but it was without having to go in and change anything. Nothing was attached to the walls, nothing was handed. And so if somebody was preferred to be on the right hand versus the left hand, we just flipped it because nothing was handed. And so
Yeah.
it takes time to do that. And then we gave choices in each of the buildings. There were choices. I mean, they had choices on the guest seating, the lounge furniture. So again, I think it's critical to give people choices. And then the case goods were standardized. So because that could then go from building to building and everything. But it does give people opportunities to personalize their space, which is important.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the biggest component? Is it the furniture or is it technology? I guess probably would be the biggest.
It's really interesting. Over the years, I saw where technology got really tiny, then it exploded. Now it's back to tiny. Technology is a big driving force because one of the things that we found is we were removing furniture out of people's offices because the technology was taking over bookshelves, and people didn't need the bookshelves, they didn't need the filing, and everything. So all of a sudden, now you got this big empty office. So technology is a big, huge component, but it's also the shared spaces, like how do people interface and and then determining really what is the correct size for your meeting rooms? What is the correct size for, not everybody needs a big conference room. And then we found a lot of people like to conference in their offices with their staff rather than go to a conference room. So it's really knowing those type of things, but allowing the furniture to flex on the personality. And I think, because, you just get people who come in, all of a sudden they get hired and within a month they're there. Well, we all know furniture doesn't come in a month.
Yeah. I was going to say, I'm thinking that, and people get moved all the time and stuff. So keeping up with people. Yeah.
They do,
Wow.
and it's hard when people have to move because, they become attached to their space. And then if you move them into something that they're not familiar with, and then they have to, you just want to make the journey to be smooth for people.
Yeah. Yeah.
But as much as you can. I mean, you're never going to be perfect, but as much as you can. Yes. And then it's really surrounding yourself with good vendors. And surrounding yourself with good contractors, for that, to help that. But the workplace is very critical. It needs to meet needs, but as we know, institutions and corporations, they evolve, and we have to be able to evolve with them in a very quick way.
A lot of questions just came to mind all of a sudden, but how do you do the marketing to the people? Like, do you do surveys? Do you do just kind of one-on-ones with people? Or how do you collect the information kind of thing? And then how do you kind of, I guess, train or kind of communicate? This is just kind of interesting for me because, like, what mode of communication is the most effective in your marketing?
There's a lot of ways of doing this. When you first start a program, you usually find out there's always a group in the organization outside of the real estate group that is responsible for a lot of the things that you do. And they understand the whole organization. And so in what you do is you meet with them, you strategize who should be brought in as an advisory committee, should it be best approached? And then at the same time, um, identify who has to be the people that you need their buy-in. That's really, really critical. They don't need you to be the process, but when you do presentations, who do you get? So once you established your advisory committee, you usually go and meet, they're usually like department heads or section heads. And so you find out what their requirements and their needs are. And a lot of times we do things with drawings and floor plans, but not everybody's visual. And then we eventually get into where we do mock-ups. And we have these folks who will come up and they'll do like the first pass of the mock-ups. And then once we all agree that these are good potential solutions, we will then open it up to a much bigger audience, and we have people coming in. So I remember when I was doing this when I was in the environmental sustainability arena, we call them the champions and the laggers. And so, you had the folks. So we always made sure we had people who were champions and, each group would have their champions, but we'd include the laggers because you really wanted them to understand the process and where it was going from. And we had a great system. We would open it up, and then we would not only open it up to the end users, but we also opened up to people who operated the spaces, the people who maintained the spaces, and because it was important. Are we blocking anything? Are we going to create something that shouldn't be happening? Do we have enough for cleaning? And we'd also building services. We always brought them in because they're the ones who are responsible for maintaining everything. And we'd get their comment and feedback, and it's very valuable. It's amazing. There's things that you go, oh yeah, that makes sense. Or their experience will tell you, you really need to add like an additional hinge for support here or whatever. And so those are easy fixes, and it's easier to do it before you roll out thousands of them. And,
Yes.
So, and then with the mock-ups, we also open it up to the people within the real estate group who manage projects, because they're out there listening to clients and they're out there seeing what they like and don't like. And we take all that feedback and we prioritize what is, easily doable. And the things that we say, okay, these are the things that are going to fall in that 20%, they're just so highly specialized. And then we put together a whole presentation on that. And so with the mock-up, there's a really good way that we developed is you have people come through and we have like little color stickers, and we identify, green, I love it, yellow, it's okay, red, no go, or something like that. And people would just put the stickers in. And so this way, you want to make the evaluations easy for people. First,
Yes.
we go over and we tell them an overview of what we were doing, how we were achieving it, and everything. And then we asked them to go and rate it, and we clearly defined what the ratings were, and then they were allowed to put additional comments. But they just went in and put stickers on the pieces of furniture. And then later we counted how many red dots or how many yellow dots or whatever. And because a lot of times we're comparing manufacturer to manufacturer as well as item to item. And makes it so easy for people, and and also it's a great people gathering time. It's fun to watch them going through, and you find people,
Yeah.
and they start talking to people they don't even know. So it's a really nice unity thing. But we've also had visioning sessions. When I was at the university, we were embarking on a 1,000-room dormitory, and at that time, it was identified that the dormitory furniture across campus was coming to the point where it needed to be replaced. So we did a whole evaluation of what the new dorm furniture should be. And we did it in multiple ways. We had visioning sessions with students. We also did it on social media with my stories, and we put out different things. And we asked people to identify if they were current student or alum, or if they were forthcoming students.
Yeah.
And we got probably about 8,000 or 9,000 responses on that one. And, and we did all of these different ways. So between the in-person meetings, and then the people who support the dormitories, again, it's the people who move the furniture around and are there when people move in, what they like and don't like. And it's just gathering that kind of data and then going back and presenting it to each group and get their buy-in.
Yeah.
And, and I think that's really, really important. And then, you're always going to miss something, but it's going to be less than what you think it's going to be. And then when you first start rolling it out, you go back and you do an evaluation to check, was this successful? What do we need to tweak? What do we need to change? And it's okay to change. It's okay to make adjustments. That's how you learn. But but the workspace, I think just keeping it flexible, because I think it's just going to keep evolving. And as technology becomes more and more a part of our lives, it's hard for us to really project what is important. At the same time, you have a lot more diversity in the different, what do you call it, generations on how they work and how they approach things. So I think there's a lot of things to take into consideration. And the more flexible you are, the easier your job is. And your response time.
Yeah. I mean, I guess for the university, you were talking about it being modular, so it can, bend and flex kind of thing. Sustainability, is that when you talk about sustainability, what does that mean to you? I mean, is it that it is modular, so you can kind of reconfigure it, and it has staying power? What else do you look for?
We also look at making sure the products that are being used is, not on the red list, especially for, the different chemicals and everything. Also, how it is manufactured and how do they, where do they products go from and everything. And then at the same time, it's also how they package it and deliver it and how many parts and pieces that you have. And again, we also look, there's certain things that you just need for maintenance. I mean, that's just important because you can have a very sustainable product, but if it's hard to maintain, then what happens is it won't last as long because unfortunately, cleaning products don't always catch up with new products and everything. So it's really, again, bringing all the different factors in because when we did do that, we looked at it from the people who moved the furniture. We looked at the people who cleaned. We looked at the people who did repairs. And we just found out what are the things that definitely were things that they ran into all the time, and we tried to make sure that worked. Unfortunately, you can't make things 100% sustainable.
Yeah.
But because, but the other thing we did too is we worked with people outside of our group with other universities and we talked about what they were doing. We brought in a group that also was very big on sustainability. So we talked about what are some of the factors that we should be watching as we select materials and products and how we approach things. But the biggest thing is the long-term usability. For a lot of reasons, you're not filling the landfill, you're not, and also you're protecting the assets of the organization.
Yeah, you don't have to necessarily, replace every year or something like that. Yeah.
Exactly. Because one of the things we had, again, going back to the dormitories, we had a chair fair and it was for the desk chair. Believe it or not, that's a huge, huge, huge concern for students. And so when we went to the people who maintain the furniture from the dormitories, because there's a group that, they oversee all the dorms and everything, they say, no casters because
isn't that funny?
they kept breaking. And
Right.
so we went to a 4-legged chair and, but it was really interesting because it was something you go, oh, casters would be great. But then, you start thinking about it and then you start thinking about, well, maybe it isn't so great. It was just those little things that they were just saying is, the casters, students are hard on furniture. And it was just, things that you wouldn't think of. And it was, you're trying to provide something and then you realize the maintenance just becomes enormous. And when you have thousands of people, that's, hard to maintain.
That's interesting. That's an interesting simplification. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought that. So Yeah, because everybody, of course, looks at the Aeron chairs like that's it. But maybe that doesn't always pan out. That's interesting. If you don't mind, just going into the art portion of your career, and maybe it's too far removed from you, and that's fine. But what did you look for in terms of art collection pieces?
Well, that was an interesting how I inherited that role.
I think that says it all, inheritance, yeah.
Merrill Lynch had a great art program, and their art program started where, there's a group that started it way before I came on board. And it was an art program where they selected art from current living artists. So a lot of our pieces were these wonderful, 60s and 70s pieces. And so what happened is it wasn't really being utilized. I mean, there was art out there, but there was really no program on other than the collection and then the key pieces and everything. But so again, working with the various different people, we developed a program and we established where art, we're talking about really good artwork, that where should it be located? Should it be in public areas? Does it go into here? And, and all these other areas. So once it was established how this art was going to be worked, was developing a program for rolling it out. But one thing that, when I was there, I worked with an art consultant. We had an art consultant who kept the condition, and every once in a while we had to get things reframed, we had to get things fixed or whatever. But at the same time, I would bring them on board, and we started taking this art out of the closets and putting it up. And when we did the executive dining area, we really delved in, and we had some beautiful pieces and everything, and we put it in. And it was so well received. That's how I inherited the program. I just, I
just did a good job.
And but I'll say I really enjoyed it, and I really learned a lot, because when we also we built a campus, and had a couple of the buildings had these long, huge skylights, and we commissioned 2 artists to do hanging pieces in these skylights. And one was a woman who was in Brooklyn, and she made these pieces all up out of recycled bottles, and then that she collected in the city. And then we had an artist that we got from Germany who did one of the other buildings. And it was even interesting because these 2 artists collaborated, because the person in Brooklyn, she was just beginning her career. And so she didn't understand a lot of the structure and cabling and everything. We went to her studio and we said, well, that's a little heavy for getting in there. The other artist, he came right in and helped her figure out what a great way to suspend her piece. And it was beautiful. At the end, it was, with the 2 of them together, it was just really, really
Isn't
beautiful.
that wonderful?
It is. And so, but then what we did is a program, we did 2 things. Merrill Lynch had a child care center there as well. So the artist came in and did a little thing for the children in the child care.
I love it.
Made little art pieces and things of that nature. And then at the same time, what we did is we had, for a month, we collected bottles off of the campus, the plastic bottles on the campus. And we put this whole thing out, why we were doing it, what it was for, and everything. And she took those bottles and they were incorporated into the art piece that was suspended in the building. So it's, again, integrating a lot of those different elements together. Then the other thing I was tasked with was going to universities that had fine art programs. And we work with them, and we did a premiere of emerging artists program. And we got mobile art walls and everything. And I would go to the university, we would meet with the different senior people and the person who was, the professor that was in charge. And we would select different works to be in here and the different students. And then we'd have an opening and, a reception in the building. And then some of them, they sold their pieces. People wanted to buy them.
Wonderful.
And so we had shows in New York. We had shows in the campus in New Jersey, and then at the same time, we incorporated a couple of the pieces into the art program. And so I know we got 2 students who had pieces that we bought for the art program. And so it's like pulling elements together, bringing people together and everything. So that was a lot of fun too, commissioning the pieces.
Yeah, like I can't help but look to, I'm just learning more about how AI is like, replacing certain roles and stuff like that. And, how they can replicate, a person putting together a project like this. But, it's just, I just don't see it really, being able to connect everything. You have people who are kind of working in even advisory roles and this and that, how we as people have our fingers in so many different pots potentially. And that's like that's the real opportunity that exists in life, right? Is being involved and then that, if you like to be with people. So yeah, it's nice.
You also get a lot of those awakening moments where you didn't think of something and somebody comes in and they just by one thing they say, all of a sudden it just opens the door for another approach. I mean, it's really wonderful in terms of that, to be able to have that flexibility and everything. So that's how I got it. And then I became responsible for maintaining the collection around the world. And it was they had a beautiful art collection, so it was very easy to work with it, because it was a wonderful collection. But it was and it got very appreciated, people, because before then a lot of the art wasn't out and really being used. And the person who at that time I worked for, he said, I want it out there, I want people to see it and everything. So, and then you just have to, and we put in little didactic labels to explain who the artist is and some of the things and everything. So it was an educational thing. And then occasionally we'd bring people in to, we'd have different openings for different collections as they went up.
Did you find that the employees were interested in the art programs, like in art exhibits?
They did, because anytime we did an opening for one of the universities, we would do it in the main lobby area or one of the main community areas in the building. And we would have the thing right at the time people would be leaving work. And it's amazing how many people came. And they would just come and they would talk to the students. And it was wonderful. These students just beamed. I mean, they were just so happy. And then, it was just like, and then you see the proud parents and, and everything. And so it was really nice. And so they would start interacting with the students and vice versa. And we did get a lot of people coming. And then you would get comments when you get into a conference room, and not everybody knew that I was, responsible for that. And we'd do a new conference space or something, and we'd put all the artwork, and then you hear people comment about the art, some good, some bad, whatever. But what it is, it was another thing to bring people together, another conversation.
Yeah, it's another conversation, exactly. Yeah.
And then people became more aware. They weren't aware of all this, of all the different artists. And so it was good.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have this side gallery, art gallery, and that's why also I'm just interested to see how corporations look at the art and how they handle it. But it was always interesting. We have here in Virginia, there's where I live, there's like an art fair, like a studio fair, and people come around to different places. And I just represent other artists. And one of the artists, he does found object artwork. So he really likes rust. So he likes putting together assemblages with ideally rusty items. And, it's just interesting getting the feedback. I just love getting the feedback. What do you think? Okay, well, that's stupid. People are just picking stuff up. Yeah, but they're making something. And you just hear kind of the conversation. And I think it's all good.
It is all good. It is, because, a lot of times as people gathering for meetings, they have like 5 minutes to chat ahead of time. And then if somebody brings up a comment, and it really is interesting to hear the dialogue and everything. And, but it was also another way to take people who are coming into the workforce to be introduced, like you were saying, education versus reality, and just to see the differences of everything. And it's, again, it's just giving them a little bit more confidence, a little bit more insight to how organizations work and everything. So, but it was a lot, I mean, you had to hang all this art, you had to transport it, you had to get it back
Oh,
to the
it's a
student.
lot.
It's a lot of work, as you know. It's a lot of work, and
Yeah.
at the same
Yeah.
time, I was managing the
Well,
other work at the same
this is
time.
what blows my mind is I thought you must have just been working from like, 6 a.m. to midnight or something, just looking after all these pieces. But it's wonderful. What would you say your legacy is from your career? What would you like Marilyn Simeone to be known for?
I would say probably the thing that I'm known for in, when I is the workplace, developing workplaces and establishing guidelines and standards. I did that for almost every place I worked. And so, I mean, that's basically how you and I met is
Yeah.
we had the whole mock-up. We were
Yep.
establishing what should we use for trading desks and everything. And I would probably say that's what people, because even when every place I worked, I established a workplace guidelines and standards. And it wasn't just on furniture. It was on a lot more than just the furniture. It was, different ways, everything from, some of the, I remember the one that we did for Merrill, it was probably several hundred pages long because it incorporated the technology and the lighting and the, everything. And and a lot of it was guidelines again. And then there was the hardcore, what we call standards. And that would change as well. But it was the same way we approached the vendors too. We went out and interviewed people and then we brought them in for mock-ups and then, and we just, and we brought everybody in together. So everybody was hearing the same thing. And then it was, again, in the beginning, and we did that even for who were the dealers or whatever, or other product. And at first people weren't talking to each other. And then before you know it, they're exchanging cards or whatever. So again, it's a good way. And then, also the industry's small. So a lot of people knew each other as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an evolution, but it's pulling people along with you. And sometimes you're very successful and other times it's not so successful. And you just learn from that and move forward.
What advice, if you have any, for high school or college students entering the field of, I guess, just design in general, like interior design, getting to corporate real estate and, managing facilities, or I guess just somebody looking at their career path, uh, in design, do you have any advice that you would impart to them?
What I would say, design is the solution to the criteria. And I think that's very important for students is to really listen, to really get to know who their audience is, get to know who their client is, and then find the best solution for them in a well-designed package. I mean, that's really what it is. I mean, we're here to guide them through the design process and everything, and then to realize also we walk away from the projects and they live with the projects. So it's important that they're happy with it because then it helps later because a lot of times they become your champions. It's amazing,
Yeah.
especially when you work internally. People become your champions by the way you actually listen to them and provide them with the proper solutions. But at the same time, provide a good quality design solution, not the latest trend, but what is something that is going to provide them a good outcome now and is going to be timeless and over the years. And that's really important too. In the trendy areas, you can do like in the areas that you have to redo all the time, like the dining rooms and all those, you're constantly replacing them because of use. So, finding that delicate. But one thing I would really recommend for the students, because we would, the majority of them at the end of the sentence says, oh my gosh, I learned so much during my internship. And I know not all universities or institutions have internships, but even if they can do it during a break, like find some place to work for 6 weeks, or if they have the summer off. We used to hire summer interns, and it wasn't part of a program in their education, and everything, but they just learn so much because they see what it takes to pull it together. Because as you were saying before, when you're in school, everything is, which is great. You have that freedom of creativity, which is wonderful, and it's not constrained. But when you get out into the real world, you have to take that creativity and how does it relate to what the parameters are set in front of you.
Right. Be more practical about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's finding that good balance, and and sometimes you can push people forward into things, but that's another thing is how do you push people forward? How do you bring them to see what your vision is and having them enjoy it? And that's again, a lot of times it's through education and communications.
Yeah, that's salesmanship there. So, it's getting them to get on board with how you see it or something like that. And
Right.
that's a whole other thing. Yeah, lot of skill sets that you need. Do you have like a favorite project, a most memorable project, or maybe like one that you're just like, oh my gosh, I can never get that one out of my mind for whatever reason?
Well, it's really interesting because I would say the thing and it was interesting because another person who was working on it is saying there was a small group of us that were pulled together. And this is again when environmental sustainability was just entering into the corporation, into the workforce. And I was part of a group and I was responsible for all of the buildings across the world, getting the data in, getting information and everything like that. But then I worked with the people who were in the finance area, and I worked with the person at that time. The president was head of the Carbon Disclosure Project, and then the banking people and everything. And because they were developing financial product, and we were supporting, and so we were all learning from each other the different types of things. And we put together a whole environmental sustainability program and all the way through what the logo was, the print, how it was presented. But then we also did environmental fairs around the world. And again, it was a case of education, and it was bringing in different people and having, we actually had classes where you could learn things, like a little half hour, type things. It's no different than it was like a little mini neocon, that type of thing. And then what it was is we did two in the US, and then eventually we just took that model, and the folks around the world did one very, very similar because they brought in their local people. And, it went from food to, it wasn't just for furniture and finishes and things of that nature. It was also for food and, different ways you could be sustainable. And so it was an education process. So I would have to say it was a really, and then we even actually we would track how many people attended. And it was amazing because we'd get 4,000 people come through. And it was just amazing how much, they learned, because at that time, when I was doing this environmental sustainability, it was just emerging into the marketplace.
Yeah.
And it was a case of understanding what, the greenwashing versus, and it was the beginning of the farm to table, so we even had some farm to table restaurants there. And, so it was a lot of different aspects. So people thought of sustainability in multiple environments rather than just one. But that was like doing a design project too.
That is interesting to look at the whole sustainable movement, and how many industries and how much of our daily life does it impact us,
Correct.
So, yeah, very interesting.
It was. And then they were also, I remember in one, the regions, there was a product, and just the cap alone, they collected the caps through there because those caps could go back and be from the container that the organization used, and they collected the caps. And so the organization would take the cap, and it was made back into their production. They'd break it up into little pieces, and then they could reuse it for the for producing again. So it was just little things like that to much larger things.
Yeah.
And because at the same time, one of the campuses that we were working on had the using geotherm as, one of the, and that was the beginning of a lot of geotherm in this area. But so that to me was really, and I just enjoyed it because I was learning a lot at the same time. It was a learning experience for me as well, and meeting people in a different capacity. It was a lot of fun. But again, but it wasn't, the approach was very similar to what you had to do when you try to develop a workplace, is take everything into consideration as best as you can. And then we had the reporting side of it too. I worked with a lot of people, we reported on our emissions, we reported on our travel, we reported, so it was just gathering all this data and then working with a group and doing the reporting on it. So it was, yeah, so that I enjoyed a lot. I found that to be very good because environmental sustainability is dear to my heart, and so it was a good learning experience for me as well. I had a good consulting firm too that worked with us.
What is it about the environmental sustainability that you like so much?
I like the idea that we're preserving for future generations. We are using objects in a much longer time period. We are, it's just trying to preserve things that if we don't, we'll lose. And then at the same time, it's just, if we don't waste things, I just like that, over years, things do get a patina. Now, some things don't, but you know what I'm saying? But it's looking at things in a entirely different way. And, can it be manufactured in a cleaner way? Is it a way to prevent people from, polluting their neighborhoods and things of that? Because we even looked at it from a social justice perspective as well.
Yeah, no, a lot of the policies that we have to have in place, or the things that we have to sign off for, various corporations, it goes into, the social aspect of it. Is it ethical? How far does it go down the line? Who you're sourcing, even your screws from and stuff like that. Looking at things holistically and looking for a truly wholesome solution. So it's a problem that you like problem solving. So there's that aspect to it, but then it's also very satisfying, that we are doing something for our future. You can be proactive about it.
Correct. And, even if it's small steps at a time, and it's a case is you have to realize, again, you don't want to be so far out that nobody has that ability to do it, that you can't address the immediate needs. So it's finding that level between the two of them. And that was one of the things too. By doing that, I think it also made manufacturers and different providers of product to have to rethink. You can actually, because I remember when we were doing something on sustainability, at another place, it was a situation where if more people do it, you will make change. Again, it's that grassroots coming up. And it was really interesting because as more people started requesting it, all of a sudden at one time, to try to find a textile that was not in the red, list was very, very difficult. Well, now it's, almost none of them are. And so it's just if everybody just does a little bit, it can make a major change.
This is the power of corporations, that you can push towards the good, in these ways. So yeah, no, it's important to have the right people in important places. So conscientious and thoughtful and highly professional. I love the idea of that you have your structure, you have your package, and you've got your standards that you hold yourself. Like even when you said, a well put together package, a well thought out solution. It's not just, okay, I'm just going to put the thought in to, the idea of it. You're actually seeing it right all the way through and getting to know the different vendors. I mean, that's huge in itself, getting to know what's out there, who's where. And, because I know that when we first started it, it was like, the Novalink grew, I always say on the wings of globalization. And then then that started to break down, and then China became prevalent manufacturer, and all these other little factories started to show up, and keeping track of those, and that's its own thing right there. So yeah.
Oh, manufacturing. Yeah. And it changes all the time. It evolves all the time, because, you see these people who manufacture come and go, and then you have to find other resources. I saw that in the textile business at one time. A lot of your textiles came from Europe, and, then the mills started to shut down, and it was getting very difficult to get good textiles. And so, yeah, it's a very, it's a constant thing that you have to look at. And then at the same time, you have to make sure as a, manufacturer, can they get it to me on time? Am I going to have dock strikes? Am I going to have this, And so, there's all those practical portions of it as well as the design portions of it. But it just made me think also, one of the things you were talking about students, what are some of the things that I think students should do or is also participate in some of the professional organizations that are out there. And a lot of them, they have student chapters, or even go to some of the conferences that are out there. Some of them do, like I said, have student things that do it. And the other thing is one of the major design firms, global design firms, they would have a student, it was for a design competition, and they had the different categories because they were interiors as well as architectural, and the students who won, it was really nice scholarship money that they received. And so I was on the jury for that for a few years. And so again, I love having students around because their enthusiasm and their buoyancies is so wonderful. And so that's the other thing I encourage, is that a lot of people really appreciate having the students around for a variety of reasons, because they're fresh, they're energetic, and they're and for some people, they're not, they're so used to technology, they go, oh yeah, I can do that for you. And then, within 5 minutes, they have it done for you. So it's, so they bring a lot to the table, and they shouldn't underestimate it.
Yeah, that's so important for students to hear, because I think, especially, the younger generations, they get pummeled by saying, oh, they don't know how to work or this or that. And, COVID didn't help because the socialization aspect was removed, and there hasn't, kind of getting them back into the office space, getting them back into the world, and knowing how, understanding, that there are cultures that you have to learn in order to, and kind of proliferating the good aspects of stuff. And then, I just see that there's a bit of a block potentially. But, yeah, giving them the space to be appreciated and then to learn is wonderful.
Yes.
Sorry, I can ramble on about a lot of different stuff. I know. But anyway, I just really appreciate you taking the time to chat today, and it's been really fun. So,
well, I thank you for the opportunity. It really, even though I have retired, you still, it brings back a lot of things, and I found it a very rewarding career, and I found it to be something that it provides you a lot of opportunities in so many places to spin off and do other things. So I think it's really wonderful. But thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. It was so great to see you again.
So great to see you too.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks for checking out Workspace Design Lab. If you're an architect, interior designer, or workplace professional looking to stay ahead in ergonomic office design and modern workspace interiors, make sure to follow the show on your favorite podcast platform
For more resources on sustainable office furniture and human-centered workspace design, visit us at novalink.com. Until next time.